The cell carefully regulates its internal environment in the maintenance of homeostasis. The plasma membrane is selectively permeable and permits only certain substances to cross. Of those substances, the chemical properties of that substance determines how it will move across the plasma membrane. Hydrophobic substances such as lipids, cholesterol, or steroids can pass directly through the membrane, while hydrophilic substances such as water, glucose, sodium, and potassium must cross through protein channels or protein carriers. There are two mechanisms of membrane transport that we will examine. First, we will examine passive transport, which is the movement of materials across the membrane that does not require cellular energy to be used. And the second is active transport, which is the movement of materials across the membrane that does require cellular energy to be invested. So we'll take a moment here and examine the passive transport mechanisms. Passive transport is typically driven by concentration gradients across the membrane. That is, a concentration gradient is the difference in the concentration of a substance across that particular membrane. Molecules will move by passive transport from areas of high concentration of that substance to areas of low concentration of that substance until the concentrations of that particular substance are equal across the membrane. And typically we call this movement moving with the concentration gradient. A few types of passive transport include simple diffusion, which is the movement of hydrophobic substances like lipids or steroids, or gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide directly through the lipid interior of the plasma membrane. Facilitated diffusion is the movement of hydrophilic substances through protein channels or protein carriers across the membrane. This movement is still diffusion in that the substances that move are still moving from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration of that substance. The only difference is that with facilitated diffusion, there is a protein channel allowing those substances to move through the membrane from one side of the cell to the other. Osmosis is the term for the facilitated diffusion of water across the plasma membrane. Water crosses the plasma membrane through specific protein channels that are called aquaporins. Figure 3.5 shows an example of a material moving by simple diffusion directly across the plasma membrane. Notice that on the left side of the diagram, there are more molecules on one side of the membrane than there are of the other, but as time passes, those molecules will diffuse across the membrane until an equal concentration on both sides is reached. Figure 3.6 shows an example of materials moving by facilitated diffusion. Both examples are still diffusion in that substances move from areas of high concentration of that substance to areas of low concentration of that substance. But in these examples, there is a protein doorway through the membrane. Part A on the top shows a protein channel through which specific materials can move through. Part B on the bottom shows a carrier protein which functions much like a channel protein, but the carrier protein changes shape to accommodate the specific substance that moves, whereas the protein channel does not change shape to accompany that particular substance or accommodate that particular substance. In both examples, the cell or the protein does not need to use cellular energy to move the substance. They're simply acting as passive doorways through the membrane.